Utah, they're giving women the vote in 1870. I guess they had to throw them that bone since they had like 5 wives. There you go. You can vote. Just don't complain about the 5 wives thing. Is that fun? 5 wives? That just sounds to me like living in hell. 5 wives? Can you imagine that? It's bad enough with daughters. Yeah?
Sister wives.
Sister wives? You guys watch that big love thing? I don't get it. The reality, I know that the reality was, for example, Brigham Young, I think he had like 112 wives.
Really?
But the reality was that a lot of them were old ladies who had no means of support. So he would technically marry them and like economically take care of them, but he's never going to actually know what their name was or talk to them or sleep with them. And they're like old ladies. So I think that there was more than like, I think there was a social role for them. It's too strange. Do you guys know there are people who still practice this? Yeah. The fundamentalist Mormons, like on the very border in the middle of nowhere, and they're actually at risk of getting arrested by the actual Mormon authorities in Utah, but it happens on the down low in places in the middle of nowhere.
Then how is that show possible?
The Big Love one they show?
No,
Sister Wives.
There's a television show called Sister Wives?
Yeah, it's one guy who's married to 4 ladies.
If you go ahead and take your illegal activity and broadcast it on TV, you are highly at risk to be arrested. That's all I have to say about that. Okay, let's talk about poverty and wealth.
The 19th century came to an end. New Yorkers would be forced to face the most perplexing conundrum of the industrial age.
Let's get into the deep water here.
Where material progress is most fully realized, one reformer wrote in despair, "There we find the deepest poverty."
On Park Avenue in 1903, you would find house after house after house of the most wealthy people, Millionaires Row. And then like literally 3 or 4 blocks away, you'd have people who didn't have enough food to eat at all on the Lower East Side. How is it possible that such extremes of wealth and poverty can exist right next to each other? And that's an issue that a big part of the country is really focused on, right? For example, and have this down as the social gospel. The 2 real differences here, the differences in terms of approaches, is the gospel of wealth and the social gospel, right? Yeah.
Does this go into the
Feminine.
Oh.
Feminine. This man here was an immigrant from Germany, and he's a Christian Christian minister. His name is Walter Rauschenbusch. Washington Gladden and Walter Rauschenbusch are perfect examples of Christian ministers in the social gospel movement who basically would say this: the country is going in the wrong direction. As Christians, you should not allow what is happening in our economic life to happen. Enormous disparities between the wealthy and the poor. Sometimes they would come out in New York City and look at their congregation, and there would be people who would be almost starving. There would be people who wanted to work. They wanted to work, but they couldn't find work anywhere because there was an economic panic going on, or it was the Great Depression of 1893. And the reality is, in the boom-bust cycle of capitalism, oftentimes there are times when there simply is no work anyplace, and people go hungry. That is not fair. People like him would sit there and say, if you look at the Bible really closely, if you look at the New Testament, Jesus preferred the poor. He threw the money changers out of the temple. Jesus went ahead and basically loved the poor more than anyone else. And the country, according to these people, the country which takes care of their poor is blessed. Jesus loves the country that takes care of their poor, right? That's his point of view. And they say, that country is not the United States of America. The poor suffer. Our system does not take care of them. And that has to change. These people would sit there and say, there's too much focus in the United States about being a good Christian as an individual, not stealing, keeping your word. There's not enough focus on we as a collective. Collectively, we're going to lose our soul because our economic system is based on greed and selfishness. So this is a critique of capitalism in terms of being too individualistic, too selfish, too grasping. And it's not good enough at taking care of the entire collective. It's not collectivistic enough, right? So again, these people will sit there and say, the thing has to change.
The promised land flies before us like the mirage. Material progress does not merely fail to relieve poverty. It actually produces it. This association of progress with poverty is the great enigma of our times. It is the riddle which the Sphinx of Fate puts to our civilization, and which not to answer is to be destroyed. Henry George.
Otto, will you read this, please?
The Christian moralist is bound to
Admonish.
the Christian employer, that the wage system, when it rests on competition as its sole basis, is antisocial and anti-Christian. The doctrine which bases all the relations of employer and employed, that rests all on the idea of self-interest, is a doctrine of the pit. It has been bringing all hell to earth in large installments.
Capitalism is really the system of the devil, not of God. And we should change capitalism to maybe even have socialism to go ahead and serve the entire country better, right? So here we have it. Jesus as the Che Guevara figure. People like this would sit there and say, Walter Rauschenbusch would say, if Jesus came back today, what would he do in the Lower East Side of Manhattan as a carpenter? He'd join the union. He'd be a loyal union member. He'd work for the poor. He'd work to organize the poor to get a better deal under the capitalist system, right? So again, that's their interpretation. And why does this have any relevance to people? Because Americans believe in the Bible. They're a Christian nation. If you preach this, it has a certain gravity with them. They say, yeah, that's true. Jesus did throw the money changers out of the temple. Jesus probably would come to Wall Street and throw those people on the street also, because they're based on their own greed. They're not taking care of everyone else. They're being selfish, right? Well, this is one interpretation, right? One interpretation. Lauren, will you read this, please?
Christ is disappointed in this nation. We are a fallen nation and apostate people. We have done those material and political things we ought not to have done, and left undone the social and righteous things we ought to have done. I see no other hope for our nation, no other redemption for society, than a religious revival as the world has never known, that shall enthrone Christ in our national ideals, and give men the common will and power to put the Christ life into social justice.
And take better care of our poor. Again, if you want to use a reductionist label, this is a very liberal interpretation of Christianity in the social gospel ministers. Okay? If you sit there and say Karl Marx and Che Guevara and Mao Zedong, these communists, people in America are generally going to think you're a freak. They're going to sit there and say, that might work in Moscow, but we don't live in Moscow. Are you a communist from Russia? You have to kind of use the language of America. And there's a long tradition of people who speak against bankers and against selfishness in American politics. Here's Henry Ward Beecher. The unjust accumulation of wealth as a canker, a ruse, a fire, a curse. Thomas Jefferson, speculators and bankers as rapacious wolves. Mark Twain, a mine is a hole in the ground with a liar standing next to it. Who's the liar? The owner of a mine. The mine operators are all liars, right? This harsh critique of money and capital, right? This is something which is as American as apple pie. And what you'll see here is we've always, and I've talked about this numerous times, the United States has always wanted to have the accumulation of wealth in a few hands which can bring dynamic growth. Banks, Hamilton growth, you know. At the same time, when that produces a wealth which begins to go ahead and separate the rich from the poor, when you have less and less equality because of that economic growth, voices are raised complaining about it, saying we need to go ahead and have more justice, more equality. That it's unjust to go ahead and have some people with so much and others with so few. In the parlance of the Occupy movement, they'll sit there and say, you know what? The 99% of Americans are being exploited and being taken advantage of by the 1% on Wall Street, which is just way too simplistic. But again, that kind of complaint has a whole lot of historical weight in our past. Who we are today is what we were, right? These things are built on these things. All right, on the other hand, so this is the social gospel, the liberal way of looking at things. So make sure you have in your notes, Walter Rauschenbusch, Washington Gladden, communalistic, the way of looking at the common thing here. On the other hand, we have the masculine point of view. The masculine point of view, you would see from someone like Theodore Roosevelt, the strenuous life of exertion, of simply trying to go ahead and work hard as an individual to make the best of yourself, or as the Army would say, to be all you can be. Other people here you'll have like this. This right here, take a good look right here. This is Amos Alonzo Stagg. He was a standout football player at Yale, and then he became a famous football coach at Yale, right? He's the person who went ahead and first started putting numbers on football players' jerseys. What was his point of view? His point of view was an evangelical Christian. He said, I will save souls for Christ. I will practice my Christianity through sports, by appealing to young men. So the idea was, take the best athletes, the man on campus which gets all the respect, and have him be a good Christian, and he'll go ahead and influence other men to go ahead and become better Christians, right? You save souls by being an example of a virile man, right? For example, instead of being a carpenter who is in a union, this interpretation of Jesus come back in 1905 would be, he's going to be the star quarterback on the football team. He's going to go ahead and put on a tuxedo. He's going to come to dinner, and all the men and the women are going to be influenced by his virile masculinity and his dedicated life walking in Jesus' footsteps, right? It's much more of an individual masculine view, which is more amenable to the upper classes, right? So for example, Amos Alonzo Stagg would go ahead and practice his ministry as a coach. He would go ahead and influence people for the better and win souls for Christ by being a really good football coach at Yale, right? Obviously, Amos Alonzo Stagg and Washington Gladden didn't have a lot in common with regards to politics. They had a completely different interpretation of how you would be a Christian, okay? So you have at this time the same movement to start the YMCA, the Young Men's Christians Association. To do what? To promote faith through athletics. The beginnings of these buildings of the YMCA, right? And again, this is the kind of the masculine view of what it means to be a Christian. These people generally are much more favorable towards capitalism. They support the status quo. They like Andrew Carnegie. They don't have a problem with this inequality of wealth necessarily, right? Now, right next is put down in quotes, the gospel of wealth. The gospel of wealth is the polar opposite of the social gospel. The gospel of wealth basically says this: godliness is in league with riches. If you are a good Christian, if you do the right thing, God will make you wealthy, right? It's a direct relationship. The justice which God rains upon you depends on you upholding his 10 commandments, okay? For example, this right here, I read a couple of these books when I was in college. They're known as the Horatio Alger stories. And what do you have? You have this young boy who is poor, and he's growing up poor, and he does all the right things in his life. He has a job selling newspapers on the corner, 25 cents a piece, and then he goes ahead and works hard and gets a promotion. He goes to school. He doesn't blow his money on alcohol or gambling or anything like that. He doesn't join a gang. And by the end of the book, he's always successful. On the other hand, there's his compatriot, a kid that's his age and also growing up poor, and I'm sorry about this, but his name actually is Ragged Dick. Okay? There's Horatio Alger, and his Ragged Dick blows his money on alcohol and gambling, joins a gang, does not go to school, and he goes to a situation which is not good. And the idea is, if you are a good Christian, if you work hard, if you keep your nose clean, you don't lie, and you work hard towards the future, you will be successful in this country, even if you're poor. And the reality is, the United States has always had a big gap between the rich and the poor, and Americans seem to be okay with this as long as poor people can get out of poverty and begin to work hard and be rewarded for their hard work in the social sphere, that you can have social mobility and move up in the world, right? So what is this called? This is called pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It's going ahead and reaching deep and working hard and achieving success for yourself. And the idea is this: you too can be like Benjamin Franklin or Andrew Carnegie. You can be a poor person. You can become rich if you simply go ahead and become a good Christian and keep your nose clean and follow the rules, right? Okay. Now the reality is that a lot of people will sit there and say, this is naive, it's a pipe dream if you think that poor people in the Lower East Side of Manhattan are going to become wealthy in 1905. Maybe a couple really, really lucky people will be, but the reality, the more modern view would be this: you live in a social system, and the social system vastly influences the individual. You can't expect a kid from South Central or like La Colonia in Oxnard. They're basically going to probably not do well because everyone around them is not doing well. Their parents aren't doing well, and the social system will keep them down. And you can't expect individuals to rise above this unless you change the social system and improve it. On the other hand, you'll have people saying, no matter where you are, if you simply go ahead and pursue your dream and keep your nose clean and take advantage of the opportunities that you do have and follow the rules, you can achieve success no matter where you are. So you see this conflict between a more individual, masculine way of achievement and the more communalistic, collectivistic, let's look at the whole social model, right? So the gospel of wealth says, basically in the United States, if you're a good Christian, you will become successful. The system will reward you. God will reward you. Godliness is in league with riches. This is the gospel of wealth. Who's the person? And obviously this begins to support the status quo. This is not a huge critique of American life at the time. It supports the status quo. For example, Andrew Carnegie goes ahead and says this: the problem of our age is the proper administration of wealth, so the ties of brotherhood may still bind together the rich and poor in a harmonious relationship. The conditions of human life have not only been changed, but revolutionized within the past few hundred years. And how do the poor stay in touch with the rich, according to him? The rich will give away all their money to the poor through philanthropy. Okay? Andrew Carnegie gave all of his money away before he died to build libraries for poor kids. Bill Gates, his foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is $33 billion. He's dedicated to give all of his money away before he dies, helping poor people in the third world deal with malaria and HIV, and helping to improve the public school system, especially for poor kids in the United States. Now that's their idea. The social contract between poor and rich is renewed because the rich reinvest their wealth in philanthropy for the poor. On the other hand, I can see people saying, instead of simply trying to launder your guilty money after having basically stolen from the people, why not go ahead and take better care of your workers to begin with? Why not go ahead and have taxation at a 50% rate for wealthy people, simply